Hello and welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for joining me on another of my interviews. Now, as you know, through the course of the last few months, we've been looking at what's lawful and what's legal. We've touched on various obligations that we have with our government. We've touched on the legal system. And sometimes this has been a bit baffling to fully grasp and understand. And I know a lot of it has certainly baffled me. Well, I'm very pleased to say today I have a gentleman called Stan McDonald, who is a researcher in law. Now, I believe he's Canadian, but he's over here, and he's going to give us an insight into council tax. We all get these bills and we all dutifully pay them, but do we have to? That's the question. So, Stan, welcome to the show. Lovely to have you with me today.
Hello, Richard. It's great to be here.
Thank you so much. Now, so I introduced you as Canadian. I know you said living Canadian, but so I made the assumption that you are Canadian.
I am Canadian, yes.
Yeah, brilliant. Lovely to have a Canadian on the channel. It's very nice to have you. But you're in Lancashire at the moment, in jolly old Blighty. You're a researcher in law. Now, how did you get into all of this?
Back in 1987, a legal issue came up, and I looked into it, and I said, this is not correct. And this was back in Canada.
Right.
And so one of the things that's very important, anytime you're dealing with law, wherever it is, it doesn't matter. The best thing you can do is you have to look at the legal requirements, the statute. Yes. Because a government, local or federal, doesn't matter, gets their authority under three things. They have, every lawyer or every law person that works in the legal system has an oath to the Crown.
Yes.
That's first and foremost. Then they have a legal obligation or an oath to the law society they represent. And then they get their third authority from the statute. So if we look at primary legislation and we look at the basics of law, whether you're in Canada, Australia, UK, US, I don't care. Find the statutes that are regulating your particular issue. There's hundreds and hundreds of statutes, but the thing is, you need to find the ones that are pertaining to you. Like, for example, if you're a doctor in Canada, in Ontario, there's the Regulated Health Profession Act. Okay? If you're in the UK, here, like we're dealing with council tax, then we would deal with the Local Government Finance Act and some other acts. And we're going to go through all that briefly. Right. We don't have time to go over great detail.
Sure.
But if a person looks into those laws, they're going to find out they have certain rights that are being trampled upon, and they have a recourse to deal with that. Now, that's what happened to me back in 1987. I dealt with the local municipality, and they didn't have the right to do what they were doing. And they basically tormented me to the point where lawyers won't generally help you. Because, as I say, the lawyers are operating under that same basic we have to follow the statute. We have to follow our oath to the Crown. We have to do this. We have to do that. So the lawyer is never your advocate.
Right. Even though you're paying them.
That's right. And so you're not going to necessarily get a fair trial. There may be exceptions to the rule, but 9 times out of 10, what they'll do is, okay, you have a $1,000 penalty. They'll knock it down to 800 and you're all, yay, I won. When if you actually do it yourself, it's a daunting task. It is.
Yes.
But if you look into it, you're going to find out that you have certain rights and they're going to disregard them unless you bring them forward. When you bring any court case into a court, well, I don't care what level of court, doesn't matter. The judge is not supposed to practice law from the bench. So he or she is not allowed to assist you in your case, even though they may know you're correct. It's your job to bring out the argument and then present it to the judge or the trial by jury or whichever way you go. So you have to find the laws. Now, thankfully, when we deal with property issues with the council tax, there's not a whole lot of laws to deal with.
Right. Oh, that's a relief.
There isn't, because if we go back to the creation of the UK government, which some of those laws apply in Canada and Australia and other places, but for the purpose of this conversation, we'll deal with council tax.
Yeah.
When the creation of the government happened in 1688, what they basically did was they dispensed with the old rules, the old laws, the old way of doing things, and they had the Act of Will and Mar, which was the very foundational government. Now, if we read into that, which you can look into, it says the Lord's spiritual, temporal, and commons. And if you actually look at it, the way it's written, they reference parliament versus parliament. They're not the same. Parliament was the creation of the monarch. And then when they have the House of Commons, that's spiritual, temporal, and commons, which is now the two houses of government. Then they created the Bill of Rights in 1688. Okay, and the Bill of Rights gave the subject certain rights.
Yeah.
And then they made up with the coronation oath. And what the coronation oath did, it actually helps us out. It says every future king and queen will swear an oath to the crown or to the monarch. Now, it also, the next thing that they do is they generate the Act of Will and Mar, or sorry, not the Act of Will and Mar, the Bill of Rights, the 1700. And that thing right there in there, if you read it, it says they're supposed to uphold the subjects' rights and liberties. And you actually have the slides for that if you want to take them out of the other presentation. But it's in there. And the next thing they did is they developed basically an act. If the crown ceases to exist because somebody dies, they have to appoint somebody new within 6 months.
Right.
So all of that stuff leads us to the current system, even though they say, well, that was 1688, that was ancient law, it doesn't matter. It does matter, because that law is the fundamentals of the current law today. Now, if we look further into the statute, we find out that there's no act that's received royal assent after 1705 or something to that nature. So therefore, all these current regulations and statutes they put forth, like the Local Government Finance Act, have no real authority, if you really want to get down to it. Because they didn't receive royal assent. They didn't receive royal assent.
That just sounds incredible. They did not receive royal assent.
That's right. So therefore they're not legally binding. Now, the acts we've covered so far are called primary legislation.
Yeah.
They can't be changed. Now, there's a thing in law. Basically, the older an act is, or an older a statute is, it's legally binding. So that's why we say precedent case law.
Right.
Precedent meaning something older and we're bringing it forward. A court now is obligated, every court, I don't care, like I say, Canada, Australia, it doesn't matter, UK. If there's precedent case law that finds in a certain fashion, especially if it's from a higher court, the lower court is obligated to follow it.
Right.
So when they break if they break the statute, they're not operating within the confines of the law. If they don't recognize precedent case law, there's maxims in law, and we should do a seminar or a presentation specifically on about 30 maxims, because that'll protect a whole pile of people for a whole pile of issues. Right? There's no way around it.
Right. Because
the courts are obligated to follow those legal maxims. So now that we've got the framework, now we can look at, okay, we know what the primary legislation is. We know they're supposed to recognize our birthright and our ancient way of doing things. And it says right in there, subjects' rights. If you look in some of those statutes, it says under section 4, IV, because they use Roman numerals.
Yeah.
It deals with subjects' rights. Well, you're the subject of the queen. And so therefore, nothing can be done to the detriment or the prejudice, as they call it, of the queen's subjects. So all these Local Government Finance Act and all that stuff, that's all to your detriment.
Would that include some of these other more modern things that have come in, like these 15-minute cities and cameras peering at you and all
absolutely.
Of
Yes,
that?
right. Absolutely. And so if we wanted to get into that, one of the issues with the ULEZ cities, 15-minute cities, is these cameras are taking pictures of your license plate. We'll assume it's your car, just for argument's sake. And they're going back to DVLA, and DVLA is charging them $2, £2, $2.50, whatever it is, to retrieve the information so they can send you a bill. So they're now disclosing your private information for profit.
Right.
And they can't legally do that because the only time they can disclose your private information is if you've committed a crime. Well, traveling on the road is not a crime. You pay for the right to do that when you pay for your petrol or your diesel.
Yes, you should hope. I mean, you should think so.
So there you go. So any of these acts can be taken apart and analyzed.
Right.
And if you analyze them, you're going to find it.
Right.
how can you be, if I pay for the right to use the road with gasoline tax, how can you now send me a bill because I drove across the city 101 times? Maybe my job happens to be on the other end of town.
Well, exactly. I mean, this is half the protest, isn't it? People have got to work, and they don't want you to just be limited to 100 days in a year of over 365. You know,
Yeah.
it is a total madness. So that's fascinating. I mean, that's going to empower a lot of people to think that all this stuff is coming down, and yet there is a very simple legal way to challenge the courts and say, well, you can't possibly do this because it's not legal. And right. Is all of this based on the fact that most of us don't know this, and so therefore they get away with so much?
That's exactly it. See, most people, they'll get some legal thing in the mail and it's like, oh man, what do I do?
Yeah.
And they're scared of it. Well, don't be scared of it. Do some research.
Right.
Like even the thing I gave you there with the 15-minute cities. What if you live on the other side of town? The idea, what they're trying to do with this U.S. 15-minute cities, is people will get tired of this, and so they're going to congregate into the city, and then the powers that be, if you will, are going to try and retake the old property that you had out in the country.
Yeah.
That's the end game.
Yeah.
I call it. They did that in Edmonton. We had a municipal airport, the oldest airport in Canadian history. 1928 it was built, and they said they took the airport out, and it's close to a hospital. You know, it was an ideal spot for medical, everything else. There was a big uproar about this, and what they wanted to do is they said, okay, we're now going to take where this airport is, 528 acres, and we're going to put 30,000 people in there, and they got basically 2 roads that go into this airport. And I'm looking at this going, this is crazy. And people protested and everything else, but the government got away with it because not enough people stuck together.
Yes.
And that's the thing. We need people in mass volumes to say, wait a minute, if this is illegal, well, how can you do this? And then people make noise and then the squeaky wheel gets heard. This is part of the reason I wanted to get on your show, because I see this injustice happening to everybody all over the world.
Right.
And so this council tax, if you look at the basics of the council tax, if you look at the paper that comes with the so-called order or bill, if you will, they tell you, if you read through it, at least the one for Lancaster, and I assume the rest are the same or very similar.
Yeah.
They restrict it and they say you can't argue this, or this, or that. You can't basically put in any sort of defense. Well, that's depriving you of due process of the law. I know of one particular case where a woman and her husband moved in to a property, and they were getting this council tax bill from the previous person. And they were trying to fight it. And I said, well, wait a minute, hold it. When the heck did you move in? Send that in to them and say, look, I'm not liable for the last guy's council tax bill.
No, quite.
What are you trying to do? Send it to me for?
Yeah.
But in actual reality, it's been admitted on record that council tax doesn't pay for any product or services. So what are you paying for council tax?
Well, that is the question.
Yeah. And you can't cross-examine. Those hearings are done in private, and court cases are supposed to be held in public. So the court case, now that the court's been held in private, so-called court.
Yes.
Okay. It's held in private.
This is at the magistrate's court where you first end up.
Exactly. So the case is held in private. That's illegal.
Right.
It's under section, I think, 109, but I'd have to look. But anyway.
So in other words, it should be public, so anybody could come in and sit in to make sure that justice is being done.
Exactly.
Right.
But they do it in private so they can get away with it.
Yes.
Then they don't record the hearing, so whatever happens, and you can't prove otherwise. But you have the legal right to record that hearing. Okay, yes, you do. And I'll provide you with the details and the documents to prove this later on.
Yeah, sure.
But the thing is, you have a right to record your own court case as long as you don't do it, obtrusively, make a bunch of noise and your cell phone rings in the middle of court.
Yeah.
So that's incorrect. The other thing that's been admitted to me, because I actually called the court, they admitted that they rent the room, basically, to the council to conduct their hearings. Well, wait a minute. If this is a court of law, it's actually within the statute under the Government Act that the local council is not to act as a court. but yet they're renting the room to the court and they're administering it through their own people. Their legal representative conducts most of the hearings. That's supposed to be done by a magistrate. What's supposed to legally happen if you have a court tax bill, and this never happens, at least as far as I know, they're supposed to take your tax bill and give it to somebody at the court, and it's either supposed to be a magistrate or a judge who looks at your case and evaluates it based on all the merits, and then if it's valid, they say, yeah, okay, this person does in fact owe the tax. They don't do that. They do it with software, and they submit a list, and then they turn around and they charge the person. So let's say it's you, for example. Yeah. They say, well, there's an administrative fee of whatever fee they give you. It might be 23 pounds, it might be 30 pounds, it might be 70 pounds. Well, in actual reality, I think it's about 3 pence. It's actually within the rule system. So now they've committed fraudulent conveyance because the paperwork's putting this bill through. Once fraud touches something, it destroys everything.
Right.
So their whole claim goes out the window. So now you get this tax bill and you look at the back of this, in our case, it's yellow paper, and it says you can't enter any arguments. And basically they render the verdict. Did you get the tax bill? Do you live at this address, and did you pay it? Well, what if you were injured, Richard? What if you were injured in a car accident and you couldn't pay your tax bill? Right? You were in a hospital. I mean, you got more important things than some stupid tax bill. That doesn't matter. They don't care because you're not allowed to put that in as a defense. Right? You can't put that in as a defense. So therefore, if you can't put it in as a defense, you're still guilty. And then what they turn around and do is they hire private bailiffs. Now, these bailiffs are supposed to be certified, but most of the time they aren't. Duke's Bailiffs is one of them, and they weren't certified, and I pointed it out to them, and now they got certified. But conveniently, they got certified on some date in the future, yet I got paperwork dated previously. So the courts are even involved in this in an act of fraud, because how can, here's an example, the guy was certified in July of 2023. Wait a minute, it's not July yet, so how can they get certified? This is exactly what happened. So this is another act of fraud, and then they'll turn around and attempt to take your vehicle.
And of course, you're under pressure. If you're that person and you're not versed in law and what have you, and you've got your reasons for why you didn't pay or whatever it is, and there they are out the door with the paperwork, and you could read it but not take it in that they're not actually certified, and you don't know. They're just telling you this is what we're going to do, and this is what happens, and this is legal. I'm ever so sorry. And fear sets in, panic, you don't know what to do, and you're not prepared for all of this. And so they take advantage of your ignorance and fear. That's exactly right. Now, it should be noted, if your viewers are listening, they don't have the right to enter your premises for any reason. Because under your own UK law, they can only do it if there's a writ of possession. And there can only be a writ of possession if you had some sort of lien filed against you on some company that you say leased a refrigerator, okay, and you didn't pay for it, so therefore they have a right to come and repossess. Right. So what property is theirs? Yeah, but what property is theirs when it comes to council tax? Nothing. Right. And so they don't have the right to trespass and enter onto your private property to take your property. You have what's called an equitable claim. Now, equity in law trumps most things. In fact, it almost trumps everything. So if you've got an equitable claim and they've got a, no claim, how can they turn around and take your property? They can't. But they'll try to do it, and they'll try and intimidate the living crap out of you so that and a lot of people, they say, well, the other thing they're supposed to do, and I don't advise anybody do this, is they want you to fill out this form as to your ability to pay council tax. Right. Well, as soon as you do that and you disclose where your employer is or whatever, then they're going to start trying to put paperwork through to put a stop to your pay. Yes. Well, I'm sorry, but that's a violation of your fundamental rights, back to our primary legislation. So once you start digging into this, you find out that the bailiffs have no authority. And another thing they do that's illegal is they imprison people in certain cases. Now, if you read the Local Government Finance Act and the Senior Courts of Justice Act and a few other ones, you're going to find out that they cannot put you in prison, because they can only put you in prison if it's a criminal offense. Now, council tax is a civil claim. It's a different jurisdiction. Yet people are locked up in jail because they didn't know any better and they didn't read the law.
those people's lives are now ruined
Yes.
to a certain extent, and they have a legal recourse against whatever council did this to them, and also the courts. Because if you do something illegal and you assist me, you're just as guilty as I am. There's a maxim in law that says that.
Right.
So
And that's what they're doing to us, and they're acting outside of the law.
Right. Now, the thing is, you said, well, everybody should contribute and everybody should pay a percentage. Well, that's fine. But the municipality's doing all kinds of things that you don't agree with, such as these 15-minute cities. They're blocking roads off. They're putting in surveillance cameras. They're spending who knows how much money to install these cameras. That's coming supposedly out of your taxes. Well, if you don't agree with it, how do you protest?
That's a very good point. Yeah, and they're not filling in I mean, some of the services that you think you're paying for, they're not even doing. Like potholes at the moment in the UK is an absolute nightmare, right up and down. We kind of know why they're doing it, because they don't want you in your car, but that's not the point. They should be doing it, and they should be filling them, and they're not. And we're all blindly paying our taxes, thinking that they will eventually get round to this, but of course they're not.
No, that's exactly right. So what one of your viewers had actually suggested, and you were talking about it in a town where people formed their own government.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, the fat cat's not going to want to give up his lunch.
No.
So we have to stick together as a unit. One or two people trying to make an argument or a claim isn't going to work. Right?
No, I agree. It needs more people to do such a thing. I mean, I use the sort of an allegory story in which people decided to make that, because the government or the council was really just not listening to what the people wanted. They said, well, if the council is not listening to what we want, and we are the people and we're paying for it and we're willing to pay for the right services because that's right and proper, but if you're not doing it, then we just need another council. They're not going to go, so we'll just do our own thing. And by a democratic vote, in my story, that's what they did. Mm-hmm. Is that a league? Can people do that?
Yes, you have a right to replace your government if it's not representing you. Your government is supposed to be your elected official, right?
Yeah.
So if they're your elected official as a general population, and they're not serving the population, they're not protecting your rights and liberties, right back to our primary legislation, then you have a right to tell the government, we don't want you. We're going to form our own government. Because otherwise you have anarchy and they just do what they want and you have no recourse. Well, that's not correct.
No.
There's a maxim in law that says you can't profit from your own faults, basically. We'll go through this on a legal maxim seminar. That won't take quite so long. But I can give you the seminar. But if you look at the legal maxims, a person can't profit from their own wrong. Well, the municipality is profiting from its own wrong all the time.
Yes. Well, we feel that right from the government with all the various diktats that have been coming down that nobody's asked for, and we feel like we're under an oppressive government rather than one that's there working for us and serving us.
That's exactly right. So what if people all went to the local municipality? No, I don't mean everybody, but I mean a good number of people.
Yes.
Went to the municipality, said, we don't want this. You have 30 days to get rid of this crap, whatever it is. Say what happens? Let's just say, for example, your street, whatever street you live on, doesn't matter. And all of a sudden they put one of these big flower boxes there, and you can't drive up your street. Yeah. Well, where do you park your car? You'd park it in your driveway, but you can't do that now because you can't get to your driveway.
Right.
So then you park it on the side of the road and somebody vandalizes your vehicle. Or it's illegally parked so they just tow it. Well, who's responsible for that? Not you, because you wouldn't have parked your car there, but you had no alternative.
Yes.
Right? Now there's a thing in the law that says ignorance of the law is no excuse. So I don't advocate just, slapping these people and trying to haul them into court. So what you do is you give them a notice and say, look, you're breaking these here laws. So how would you like to respond? And I did this with a council tax case, and they didn't bother to respond because they can't answer my question. I ask a question. If they can't answer it, they more or less agreed. Right. And because they couldn't defend their claim, right? There's a maxim in law that says he who asserts must prove. Okay. Right. And that's where this council tax challenge comes in, because if they can't prove the obligation, they can't prove a service, and they're depriving you of due process of the law because you can't enter any sort of defense, how is any of that lawful?
Well, exactly.
They can't answer it, so guess what? It goes away. If enough people did that, we turn this thing around.
And this is really what we need to do at the moment, is to get people to be, I suppose, brave enough. We've been so indoctrinated into the fear of being summoned to court if you don't pay. And then, so many people will sort of go, oh God, and then the threat of bailiffs and all of this. And eventually a lot of people will just give in because they suspect that they'll either end up in prison, or they'll have such a bad debt that they'll have to sell the house and then end up on the street, or something like that. Or, of course, that they'll have a county court judgment against them, which will affect them if they ever want to borrow money or get a mortgage, or indeed work. And so all these threats sort of linger on the back of, if you're not a good person and you don't pay what we tell you to, then you're going to suffer, which is not a way to run a country or a community.
Exactly. Now, if I want to bring you to court for any reason, let's just say I'm city council. Normally, what happens in any court case, you are what we're going to call the defendant or the respondent, and I'm going to be the plaintiff or the moving party to bring this to court, right? I'm the complainant. The claimant, claimant, plaintiff, doesn't really matter. So normally what happens is I would write the documents up, and I would send it to you, and you have to respond to it. You have 30 days or 28 days. And then, okay, if you don't respond to it, then I do whatever I got to do, and I bring you to court. Yeah. Now, you get a claim in council tax, and what do? They send you a notice, and bang, you're going to court. Well, wait a minute. You didn't prove your case, right? You just said, here's the bill.
Yes.
Okay. Well, how did that bill get calculated? In the case what we went through earlier, the person only lived there for less than a month, and all of a sudden they got a tax bill, and they're liable for it. Well, no, they aren't. You didn't prove the obligation. You didn't prove the claim. I don't even know how you calculated this tax number I'm supposed to pay. How did you calculate this? There's no disclosure. There's no nothing. Oh, but if you don't admit that you live at a certain address, did you get the bill, and did you pay the bill? Well, how is that lawful? Right?
Well, yeah.
It isn't. So they're depriving you of due process of the law, which means now you have a problem, because that becomes what's called a tort damage. And the court that's doing this, the legal advisor and the people within the court, they're just as guilty, because they're just pushing this crap through. And when they send it off on a computer thing, and they send it out, and it's 3 pence, I think it is, for the claim, and they give you a bill, say it's 40 pounds. Wait a minute, that's fraudulent conveyance, and you're aiding and abetting a criminal activity, because this isn't due process of the law. The court isn't recorded, and I have no recourse. Now, if you go to appeal it, right, there's no recording unless you're smart enough to record your own court case, right? Which you can do. You can legally do that. Then the next thing that happens is, okay, if you go to appeal, you put the application into the court, and the court says no. Of course the court says no, because the court is the officer of the court, is the legal representative, the same guy that conducted the hearing the first time when you got railroaded. So do you think they're going to let you do it again?
Yeah.
No. So they're going to throw it away, and then you send it into what's called the administrative court. That's where your next step is, because that's your next appeal. Well, we already proved the administrative court that we have to deal with for our area is actually accepting paperwork past the 28 days. Wait a minute. If the statute says 28 days, how can you now be accepting paperwork, which I haven't even seen yet? Which means now the administrative court is also breaking the law. So now you got another problem. So now you can't appeal to that court, because if they're accepting paperwork past the 28 days, and they've admitted that, I have a letter to that effect, and you haven't seen it. Remember, I said in the court process, you have to always see the paperwork first. So if I'm going to bring you into court, I have to give you a chance to get a remedy. You mediate before you litigate. So
Right.
We have a mediation. Well, if I all of a sudden just Richard, you're going to court. And you're going, well, what for? What did they do? Let me fix it. No, we don't care about that. We're just going to haul you into court. Is any of that lawful? No. So is this council tax lawful? Absolutely not. And all these various, councils, they're all operating on the same basic principle. right?
So what should people do then? Let's say, I mean, we've had April, so a lot of people would have had their council tax bill. They may have paid the first one, and they may be thinking twice about it now. So in a way, they've made a contribution. It's like, okay, I've paid whatever the first bill is, say £100 for the sake of argument. But they're beginning to think, do you know what, actually, having listened to you, listened to the show and listened to other people and seen the things that are happening and thinking, actually, I disagree with this. I don't want to pay anymore. I've had enough. What should we do?
Well, in order to get into, without getting into a legal problem, a lot of people just go, oh, I'm going to stop paying. That'll fix the whole problem. No, that doesn't fix the whole problem. Because you're basically now, because you paid the first time.
Yes.
There is an implied contract.
Right.
So what you want to do is you want to establish that implied contract is in fact based in fraud. Now, you can't knowingly aid and abet somebody committing an act of fraud. I don't care where you are, what planet you're on, I don't care. So what you do is you disclose to them, say, look, I don't believe this is correct. Could you please answer the following questions based on my tax notice? And you scrutinize the tax notice, right? If, let's say the person, hopefully they were in arrears, so they got this demand notice and then they paid it, because then they still have that yellow piece of paper. At least that's what it is for us. Right. So then you look at that and you say, well, wait a minute. How can it be legal when there's no disclosure as to how the funds are calculated? I don't know what products or services this thing pays for. And I have no chance of a defense, because the only defense you're going to allow me to give is basically admitting I got the tax bill, I live at a certain address, and who cares why I didn't pay? So that doesn't give me due process of the law. So that means your court case, if it had progressed to that procedure, would be unlawful. So now you're not really, you're questioning. You have a right to question any company if you don't think they're operating right.
Yeah.
And these companies all are for profit, right? Obviously.
Yes. So, and we should say they're a corporation. You know, that's the other thing. They are a legal corporation, the councils. They're not just working, as you might think, as a a non-for-profit company. They are for profit. That's their standing, and they're on places like Dun and Bradstreet, if I remember rightly.
Yes. Now, that's a key point, because what I did for one of the councils is I looked at what they were engaged in. What did they financially invest in? Well, some of them said they're going to divest, which means withdraw funds, from things that were dealing with companies that dealt with arms, weapons. Well, wait, hold it. So you're telling me now that the corporation is investing in military type stuff?
Yeah.
Wait a minute. That's now an act of treason against the public. And if you're gaining from those investments, where's my share of that? Where's everybody's share of that?
Yeah, quite.
And so they said they were going to divest because they were engaged in stuff like that. I looked at a document which showed their bed and breakfast expenses, Airbnb expenses, hotel expenses. Well, how is that related to what we're doing? So you guys are misappropriating funds, and you're trying to extract the funds from the innocent taxpayer. So I want a disclosure, and you have a right to do this under the Freedom of Information Act. Your right to the freedom of it's called a DSR, right? And you're a subject now at this point, so you have a right to say, where do my funds go? What are they being used for? If they won't disclose, then why am I obligated to pay? I don't even know what they're being used for. Now I find out they've been used to finance acts of war.
Yeah, which is very worrying.
Yeah. Right. And then so there's another, you analyze their paperwork. And if you say, well, I would like it, you're not refused. The thing is, you're not going to refuse to pay.
No, you're just asking questions.
You're just asking a simple question. Until I get a response to my question, I'm withholding.
Right.
So you're not, you don't ever refuse, because if you outright say, I'm not paying, that's it, we're done. Then now you're in breach of contract. But if you're questioning the contract, or you're questioning the legal operation of that corporation, now, one thing that your viewers should write down, and include, maybe you want to write it down too.
I will write it.
It's called the Clearfield Doctrine.
The Clearfield Doctrine.
Yes, and I will send you some paperwork on that. But if you looked it up in Black's Law Dictionary, it's probably in there. And what is...
I do have Black's Law Dictionary, actually.
Okay, well, if you want to look it up, it's probably going to say something to the effect that if a company operates with money and species of money and under like paperwork like that, they assume the same liabilities as any other normal corporation. So can you now, as a normal, your own individual, can a corporation impel you to do something without a contract? No.
You
right?
can't. Yeah.
Right? Like when you go to, if you work for a company, I don't pick a company, I don't care.
Yeah.
Right? JCB, right? They're here in the UK. So when you walk in the door, you apply to JCB rules because you're an employee.
Yes.
Now, if you work at, I don't know, Sainsbury's, they're going to have a different set of rules, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Well, if you don't work for this government corporation and they won't disclose where the money's going, they don't give you a fair chance at a trial, you scrutinize their documents and you find out they're spending it on arms races or military type stuff. Lancaster Council, for example, they have the parking, underground parking. We pay for that. But if you park your car and don't register or don't record it, basically on their little app, they'll send you a bill.
Yes.
Well, okay, I get that because you're using a space, you're using a service. But when they put in these ULEZ cities and they put around these big flower boxes blocking the road off so you can't park your car, you don't want that. And that costs an expense. When they install those cameras at 40,000 pounds per camera or whatever the number is, who cares? You didn't ask for that, so they're misappropriating funds. What there needs to be is a referendum of the people, by the people, to say, do we want this? Somebody has to take charge and do this and say, okay, we have a meeting. We're going to have a meeting on whatever day, pick a day, at some private place, not public, because they can shut down the public park.
Yes.
Right? Have it at a private place and say, we're just here for a vote. Anybody that wants to attend on X day at X time can make their vote known, whether or not they want this ULEZ city. Let's just pick that.
Yeah, yeah.
And then everybody's got an equal opportunity. Somebody would have to run this ad in the paper 3 times. There's a rule of 3, so you do it 3 times. Do it. Let's just pick July. So we'll run it in July, on the first week of July. Then we'll run it on the second week. Then we'll run it on the 4th week. And then the 5th week, which is now be August, that's the day of the vote. And if everybody says we don't want this, right? And you have their name and you tally it and you do everything, then they can analyze it. As long as those people are from that area, you know, and verify it by their license plate number or their driver's license, whatever. You can say, okay, majority rules. 85% of the people don't want this ULEZ city. So all the expenses that you incurred, which you shouldn't have, those funds should be coming back to the people. And this crap should be gone, disconnected.
Yeah.
Right? You're not inciting a riot. I'm not saying go to the city hall and, you know, do some drastic stupidness.
No.
You're just doing a democratic vote by the people for the people.
So once you've done the vote, once you go to the council, do you, or you take them to court?
Well, you don't want to go to court right away because you want to mediate before litigate.
Right, yes. Mediate before litigate, yeah.
So you bring it to them, say, nobody wants this. Majority vote of people don't want this 15-minute city crap. And they don't want these flower box things blocking their roads.
Yeah.
Right? So we're not going to do that. Right? And if you want to persist in doing that, then you're committing treason against the people or harm to the people, and you're misappropriating funds. If they're your representative, you have a right to dictate how they spend money.
Yes, of course you do.
Right. Otherwise, they're not your representative. So if they're not your representative, what are you paying them for?
Yeah. Who the hell are they?
Exactly.
I mean, the thing is, I mean, you've put that so eloquently and logically. I think, again, it comes back to this feeling that people feel helpless, and yet it's all there. We know we pay for them. We know they're supposed to be serving us, and yet there's this sort of missing link that we get to a point where we go, oh dear, they're not doing what we want. We just have to acquiesce, and we've become weak. We're not questioning why. We're not saying, hang on a second, who actually, did you want this? Barry, did you want this? Who actually asked the council to do this? And if nobody's going, well, I didn't, did you? No, I didn't. Well, why the hell are they blooming well doing it then?
Exactly. but nobody stands up.
No.
This is where I hope, like your show, you got people that are trying to stand up.
Yeah.
But go back to the fundamental basics of law, and then use your head for just logical thinking.
Yes.
Right? And you don't want to fight with them. You
No.
don't. So you give them this, here's the opportunity. Answer how this is legal or how this is lawful. And when they can't, they go away, because if the fraud comes out in a court of law, man, that's going to set a precedent case.
Right.
And
So
then
they don't want to go to court, do they?
That's right. And now the person that I helped with this issue, they did go through the rigmarole, and then the municipality sent some more garbage, and I said, give me this crap. And so I analyzed this yellow paper I'm referring to and sent it back to them, said, you got about 30 things in here you must answer before we go to court. Otherwise, you're depriving of the civil court procedures. And they disappeared.
Right.
They disappeared. They didn't even have to go to court now.
So they just went quiet.
Yeah. They went quiet. Now, if they don't want to answer it, they've only got 30 days. That's civil court rules. Right. So anybody that's going to do this in the UK, pull up your Senior Courts Act related to the council tax. Pull up the Senior Courts Act.
Courts Act.
Yeah, pull up the Local Government Finance Act. Local Government Finance and Enforcement Act is the third one. Right? Start doing some research into these acts. You're going to find out the Local Government Finance Act and the Local Government Finance and Enforcement Act get their authority from each other.
Yeah.
They don't get their authority from anything else. And if you're in court and you're not allowed to present a defense, well, that violates civil court procedures. If you want, Richard, we can go through, and we'll do it as a presentation. I'll show you in the law where I'm right.
Right. No, that would be great. I mean, this has just been, I know you came here with a quite a lengthy presentation. I just wanted to really introduce you to the audience, and the fact that, you know, you've got this knowledge base, you've tried it out, you've tested it, and then it would be fabulous to do that on some separate videos so that people can actually see how this all knits together.
Yeah, we can do that anytime you want.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, just on this front, you know, there's that sense, as I said at the before we started recording, mm-hmm. that, you know, I think if you're working under the principle of having a community and looking after one another in a community like we all feel that we ought to, that we all need to contribute something towards that community, and that the people who you've elected to administer that should take those funds and do as you asked. And as you so clearly have stated, you know, that's not what's happening. And so then there's this problem, a conflict, and people are feeling, well, how is it we can't address this? You've very clearly stated that, well, we can. The legal system is actually on our side to do that, because they're working corruptly against us to extract the money and potentially investing in illegal things like arms and things like that, or whatever it is that nobody actually agrees for or asked for. So right. we should feel empowered that actually, instead of feeling weak and not knowing about it, it's all there. As you said, read up about it, and empower ourselves, get our acts together in unison, and do something about it.
Well, there's three things that people have to realize. This is going to open everything up for you.
Right.
We have, because the government, back in 1688, back to our primary legislation, that was done by contract. It was an agreement from the people that the monarch would take over and basically correct the wrongdoings previously. So that's under a contract. Now, if we're the subjects, as it states in that set of rules, primary legislation, the Act of Will and Mar, 1688, Bill of Rights, Act of Settlement, 1700, Coronation Oath. If that's the case, and these guys are our elected officials, let's go to trust law. Trust law is going to make it real simple. There's three positions in a trust. You can have any two of those three. Now, what the government normally does in a court is they make you out to be the trustee, which means you're the responsible party to fix this mess, and they make themselves out to be the beneficiary.
Right.
Okay, and then there's the executor. Well, if you have the authority to sign on behalf of something, right, your trust, your name, right, Richard Vobes, You technically are what?
The executive.
You're the you're the executor. And it's supposed to be to what? Your benefit. So that makes you the beneficiary.
Right.
The government's your elected official, so they're by virtue of their own position, your public servant, they're your trustee.
So
they're not
be,
acting.
Yeah.
They should be acting on your behalf, and they're not doing that. So get rid of them, fire them.
So is it right? Now this is interesting, because you're the first person, apart from a friend of mine called Stuart, who keeps going back to, he says nobody mentions the executor. Nobody mentions that in these trust situations. And he says that when you go, if you get as far as going to court, once you're in the court, what they are trying to do is to get the jurisdiction, so that, because it's down to a presumption that that unless you rebut it, they will presume that you're the trustee. But you go in as the executor and the sole beneficiary, and you say to them, when they say, state your name or whatever it is, you're saying, hang on a minute, let's just state the positions. I'm the executor here and the sole beneficiary, and you are the trustee. And they don't like that, because they want you to be the trustee and pay the bills.
Exactly. Now, that's not to say you should do something illegal and then try and pull this. That doesn't work that way.
No. Because
that trust applies to government regulations. If you do harm to somebody, that's totally different. You have to fix that. You have to rectify that. Yes. But a lot of times they won't let you speak. So the solution is, when you do your paperwork, identify yourself on the paperwork, as well as what you can do orally, because the judge's job, his or her job, doesn't matter, and I don't care what court you're in, is to render a verdict based on what's presented orally, which verbally, or in writing. Now, if the judge disregards any facts in law that you presented orally or in writing, the whole court case is void, because it's fraud on the court by the court, so the case is garbage.
So you've got to get your paperwork in order.
Yeah, but it's fairly simple. I mean, I'll just put your name down. You're the whoever. You're the defendant. So in this case, you're the respondent. Defendant, call it whatever you want.
Yeah.
And you're the beneficiary and the executor.
Right.
And then when they see that, we don't want this guy in court. Let's get rid of this case. And a lot of times they'll stall the case, and then after about the 6th or 7th time, they say, well, we're not going to proceed with this.
Yes.
See, this is the one problem. There is a gentleman out there, and I don't want to name names.
No.
But he turns around and he says, well, he won his case against council tax, and actually he didn't. They withdrew the charges. So he didn't really technically win his case. They withdrew the charges because they didn't want public knowledge.
Yes.
And another case he did, they knocked the fine down. So technically he didn't win.
No, but
it's a partial victory. Partial victory. Yeah.
Yeah. But for all intents and purposes, he's taken them, he's challenged them. They don't want to accept the responsibility, because he's made his position as executor and sole beneficiary to them, and they know that they can't take it to court, because then they've got to pay, and it would expose the whole court system.
Well, I think we just did that.
Yeah, well, we've just done that, so that's fine, because we're not in the courtroom itself, hopefully.
Yeah, and the thing is, when you have a court case, like if I start slandering somebody, I could be nailed for libel and slander.
Yes.
But if it's a court case and it's already in the courts are public, so I'm not slandering anybody. I'm just disclosing what the law is, and I'm not telling you to take my word for it. I'm saying go look it up. I told you what to go read it. The best thing a person can do, though, is download whatever statutes they can get off the internet, right? And make sure they're from the government, not some guy that twists it and download it, because you have a right to use the old laws. Because, for example, and I have to use a Canadian rule here, but in Ontario, the first Highway Traffic Act was written in 1928, and it was to regulate people in commerce. If you look up in your dictionary, go look up, unless it's been modified, go look up the word traffic.
Yes. It
says one engaged in commerce.
One engaged in commerce.
Yeah. And the word driver, right? One being employed. So the Highway Traffic Safety Act, or the Ontario Highway Traffic Act, or the Alberta Traffic Safety Act, or whatever they call it here, if you go back to the legal definition, it was to regulate commerce. And if you're making a profit by using the highway, the roadway, you should pay a tax
Right.
because everybody paid into it, and all of a sudden you're making all this extra money on it. So when they charge you with drug trafficking, what the heck do they mean? They mean you're engaged in commerce by selling, a controlled substance usually.
Yes.
Drug trafficking doesn't mean the transportation from A to B.
No. No, I see what you mean. Yes, the trafficking is, yes, it's about engaged in making money.
Exactly. So are you driving your vehicle down the road? No, because you're not being employed. Now, one of the things that they do is they turn around and in the UK, you're not even the registered owner of the vehicle. You're the keeper now. You used to be. So what I did was I sent a letter off to DVLA and I said, wait a minute. If I'm not the registered owner, I'm only the keeper. If you're the registered owner, you're the responsible party. So here's my latest repair bill due to this yearly inspection. They wrote back and sent it back, said you got to pay that on your own. So what you can do to get your vehicle out of the system if you want to, but you're going to have a fight, is you write to DVLA and say, I want the birth certificate for my vehicle, the manufacturer's certificate of origin. They call it a different, but it's the same thing.
Yes.
And if they won't give it to you, then what do they have? They don't have an equitable title because they can't produce the document. And I happen to know that your government turned around and sold those years ago. So they have no equitable title. They can't prove it. They don't have the title document. So to solve your problem, you go back to the manufacturer for your vehicle and say, I want this certificate, right? Birth certificate or manufacturer's certificate of origin. Then once you get that, you write to DVLA and you say, I'm the registered owner and I have the document. And you get a certified copy and send it to them, tell them to update your V5 document. Now you own the vehicle because you have equitable title. And you gave them a certified copy. You can get it certified through a notary.
Yes.
So now who's the owner of the vehicle? You or them? You got the title document right from the manufacturer. You are. And you got the, equitable claim. So do they own your vehicle? Absolutely not.
So is it easy? I mean, if you've got a second-hand vehicle, as so many people have, say it's a Ford of some description, do you write to Ford and say, look, I've got this vehicle, here's the registration number, could I please have the manufacturing certificate of origin?
Yeah, or a certified copy thereof.
Or a certified copy. And they're obliged to do that?
Well, they might make you wait a long time, but they should give it to you.
Right.
Probably after this video a few months later, they probably won't, but there you go.
Yeah, we won't give him it. He's a troublemaker.
No, because the thing is, when they do that, see, here's the problem. When you register anything,
yes,
your birth certificate, you registered your child, you gave them to the state, you look at your birth certificate, when you fill out the form, it says informant.
Yes.
So your parents informed on you to the government, and it becomes government property. Now you have 7 years to correct a wrong. You can do that by an affidavit in a court of law. So wait till you get a court of law, put an affidavit of status in there. The affidavit of status is not rebutted. And this goes for the rest of your cases. If you're dealing with council tax, write an affidavit of truth. An unrebutted affidavit stands as truth in fact, or stands as truth in commerce. And what is a court case? It's all about money. It's all about commerce. When they don't rebut it, a year plus a day, it becomes international law.
Stan, you've told us a lot of stuff. It's obviously a lot for people to take in.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, I guess you've been doing this for some time.
34 years.
How many?
34 years.
34 years. So, yeah, absolutely. So this is where people get muddled, I suppose, because they hear something like this and they'll see other videos that have similar sort of themes and they think, wow, this is great. And then there's all that knowledge that actually takes a bit of time to sort of really focus in what is the procedure on how you do each little bit, because people are not used to this. You know, the world is very different from how it looks.
That's right.
And lots of these organizations are corrupt. They seem to be there not for your benefit, but actually to extract money from you, and so on and so forth. And so talking to you, clearly there is a need to fully understand this and take it nice and slowly through each little stage so that people can understand exactly what you mean by an affidavit of status,
Yep.
how you would present that, and you know, that just loads of people would think, actually, I don't want the government or the police or anyone to feel they have the right to take away a vehicle I've paid for, and I've really only paid to keep it rather than to own it.
That's right.
And so all of these things clearly, so I need to get you back.
No problem. No problem.
But and I know you're in the process of putting together a website that will have a lot of this knowledge on.
That's right.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
But it's not there yet.
No, it's not there yet because I have to turn around and make the documents so that they're easy to understand. One of the
Yeah.
things a lot of people do is they get confused with this legalese garbage.
Hmm.
And when you start challenging the system, one of the common cases they'll bring up is Meads versus Meads. And he's a pseudo litigant and Meads versus Meads, and they try and paint you with the same brush. So because there was a lot of people over the years that used to turn around and try to say, well, use your thumbprint and use your birth certificate and put a stamp on it and turn it upside down, put some crayons on it and mail it in. None of that crap works.
Right.
None of it works. And when they see that, they just go, oh, it's another one of those free men, and they just label you the same. So before you get off doing any sort of paperwork, right, you already know you're going to be in for a challenge, and you already know they're going to try and fight you because they don't want to give up control, right? So one of the first things, when they come up to you and say, well, it's Meads versus Meads, you're an opto-pseudo litigant, which, what the heck does that mean? But anyway, you can say, no, I'm not no opto-pseudo anything. I turn around and I used your statute, which is your regulation applied by your government, right? Because what is a statute? A statute is a set of rules that govern a corporation, right? It's like an employment policy. It's a regulation to confine what you can do.
Yes.
Right? Well, there's the Senior Courts Act. So if you quote some section out of the Senior Courts Act that says you have the right to record your own court case, I'm just going to use an example. Say it's Section 109. You can put it in your affidavit or you can put it in your paperwork. I will be recording my court case pursuant to Section 109 of the Senior Courts Act. Or you can shut the heck up, and if they turn around and say, that was illegal, that's void. No, it isn't. Section 109 of the Senior Courts Act. Because these people don't read the law.
No.
They don't. They just go along, well, this is what we did last week. This is what we did 2 years ago.
Yeah.
But if you actually look at the statute, that's your remedy. None of this, I'm going to put a red stamp on it. I'll sign on the left-hand side with purple ink. I'll spit in the corner and chew the edge off it. None of that garbage works. It doesn't. And that's what will get you into hot water.
Right. Yeah. So
but what,
use their axe against them.
That's right.
Because
now,
they have yeah.
Keep in mind that they're going to change the act to try and screw up what you're trying to do, because they're going to try and close the loophole. So my answer is download the act as it is now. Like, for example, I'll go back to the Ontario Highway Traffic Act, 1928. If it was to regulate commerce, which is what its original intent was, and they now twisted it so that everybody has to register their vehicle, everybody needs a driver's license, blah, blah, blah. Okay?
Yeah.
Well, the Fundamental Act was based on one thing. You guys twisted it into something else. That's fraud, so that doesn't apply. Fraud destroys all that it touches.
Because you have an original act that is before that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like one court case I dealt with that said that they were trying to nail this person for having vehicles on his property that didn't have license plates on them. Well, under the guidelines of Section 7.1 of the Highway Traffic Act of Ontario, you don't need to have license plates on them. So then they said, well, yeah, but the vehicle's derelict because it doesn't have plates. Then they turn around and change it. Well, the vehicle's derelict because you haven't started it. Well, wait a minute. You're asserting the vehicle's derelict. Have you tried to start that vehicle? No. So you don't know if it's derelict or not. But the courts will go along with it. Well, the same thing with this. Under the government, the Local Government Act, which is another act you should look up, they don't have the courts. The municipalities don't have the right to take on a position of a court. Well, wait a minute. Didn't I tell you earlier that they hire the room of the court and they operate?
Yes.
So that makes the whole thing illegal. So now the court's committing fraud. Once there's fraud on the court loses its jurisdiction permanently. So they have no jurisdiction to bother you ever again. And I will be sending you a copy of these acts so you can share them with the viewers.
Yes, please.
Because enough of this crap has gone on. I've had enough of it.
Yeah.
I put up with this stuff for 34 years, and I studied the law because there's nobody going to help me. Right?
No.
When I first studied this thing, I went into court 10 days later and I won my case. I didn't know what the heck I was doing. But what I did, and this is what I advise a lot of people to do, just go to a court and sit in the court. If you have to, do it, spend 4 or 5 days. Who cares?
Yeah.
Sit in the court, see how the thing runs. Print out a copy of the Senior Courts Act or Civil Court Procedures. Read it. Go watch how it's done. You'll see what's happening. Then what I did is I went, and I started writing down court case names. Because it's public record, I pulled the court case. I see how it's laid out. I asked them to photocopy it. It's public record. Who cares? Yeah, I got somebody's private information. Who gives a crap? I'm using it for a template on how to do it right.
Yes.
And then I said, okay, well, this act and this act and this act apply. So then I study the act. I take their document, I rip it all apart, I reassemble it into the way I want, and I file it in court. If you don't file the paperwork on the proper format the way they want it, they're going to say this isn't right, and they're going to throw it out. They don't like self-litigants because a self-litigant speaks the truth. They can't handle the truth.
Yes.
That's it.
Stan, this is really interesting. Thank you very much. So many people will be absolutely fascinated. And as I say, it would be wonderful to get you back to go through some presentations which we can put on the channel and people can look at that. I think the advice of going into court and just sitting and watching is brilliant, because so many people are frightened of a court. And they may not even know that they can go in and just sit and watch, and quietly make notes and listen to it. You might not be able to record it, of course, because it's not your case, but you can watch and listen and observe and learn, and that's how you deal with things. It would be great to have you back and learn more.
Absolutely. And in fact, I already got the next presentation. So anytime you want to go, we can deal with what's called maxims in law, or we can deal with court procedure as a general overview. Yeah,
no, that would be brilliant. We'll arrange a time, and then we can just house these videos, and people can just refer to them as and when, assuming YouTube doesn't kick me off again.
Yeah, well, that's another thing. That's freedom of speech, and then here they are trying to sequester it.
Yeah, absolutely. But people need to know all of this. This is so important, and I can't think of a better time at the moment where more people are starting to sort of question why is stuff happening, and this is a way to deal with it.
Yes. Now, you are going to be met with a challenge. They don't like self-litigants, so make sure your facts are verifiable, provable, and any statement you make, try and support it with evidence, pictures, excerpts out of the statute. Don't walk in there and say, I'm just going to rattle all this stuff off in front of the judge, because they'll shut you down.
Right.
So put it in writing as well as orally. And then make your most strongest argument first. If it was council tax, I'd say, I got this yellow piece of paper, and they don't allow me any sort of defense. The only thing they care about is, did I get the bill? Do I live at this address? And did I pay it? So how is that due process of the law? The court right there has deprived you of due process of the law. The case is void. It's fraud on the court by the court. And that's a term you guys can look up. Fraud on the court by the court.
Thank you so much for your time, Stan.
No problem. Thank you.
I really appreciate it, and we will get you back, and we'll do some more. I think people will be quite fired up by this, so I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So, ladies and gentlemen, there you go. How about that? An introduction. We've been speaking about it in lots of different ways, and here is another way using the axe against people, against the government who've got these acts and should be abiding by them, but are not, and in many cases. And how would you know unless you've actually read up and prepared yourself? And that's what it's all about. And so another big thanks to Stan. But I'll be back again with more interviews and bits and bobs, and we'll bring Stan back with some more. But for the meantime, from Stan and I, thank you so much for watching. Till next time, goodbye.